All right. Here we go. Bitcoin Humanities Podcast. This is technically it's the second one that we've done. And though I've had some sort of offshoot ones that have deep dived into Bitcoin and theology, Bitcoin into Christianity, Bitcoin as a fulfillment of the New Testament, all sorts of directions, Bitcoin in quantum physics, which is something I'm very interested in now. But anyways, here we are with Aaron Redwing. And actually, I should probably ask you how you want to be introduced,
Oh,
Aaron.
I mean, I have so many weird titles, honestly.
Yeah, like, which one you
These days
prefer?
I just go by Bitcoin astrologer because it's sort of provocative and, signals the right things for people.
Alright,
Um,
so should I avoid Aaron? I'll just go Bitcoin
no,
astrologer.
no, no,
I'll
Aaron Redwing is totally fine. I'm totally doxed. But yeah, Aaron Redwing, Bitcoin astrologer. That's kind of my main title these days.
Alright, so we're here with, Bitcoin astrologer, right?
Mhm.
And I'm Bitstorian. So, we've got both of our names, well, a bit of a portmanteau, mine is anyways, showing us our involvement in Bitcoin and our interest of history and astrology. Uh, Aaron is a co-host of um, the Hell Money podcast, and the founder, the creator of the Ephemera project, right? Which is mainly what we're going to talk about today in its relation to the humanities. And of course, you have your YouTube channel at Realizing Aaron, and anything else you want to mention later in the
Yeah,
show.
I'm realizing Aaron everywhere. So TikTok, X, YouTube, it's all the same at realizing Aaron, just to
But,
keep things simple.
but not Instagram anymore, right?
No, no, yeah, I
Oh, I
mean,
saw your
Instagram is
life
sort
is
of like
better.
Facebook these days, so it's kind of, I find it a little stifling as, like, a content creator, It's like, I think when you do things like make a podcast or, make videos or whatever, one of the biggest things that's hard to overcome is this feeling of, "What are my friends and family gonna say?" I don't wanna do this in front of all the people that knew me from middle school or high school or whatever, so, yeah, for that reason, I'm not on Instagram just because for me, that was always like, the 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 scariest place to be openly myself,
Yeah.
in terms of my online identity.
Yeah, I guess that's why I don't use Facebook too. Like, yeah. But maybe we'll get to this point where everybody stop using it so much that everyone starts to again, like LinkedIn. Like all of a
Yeah.
sudden people are using LinkedIn. Uh, but all right. So big questions about this. What I do a lot, I'm a professor here in upstate New York. I'm historian by training. It's my PhD. But as a historian, uh, I'm very much a theorist, right? For me, Bitcoin is theory. It's a method for producing truth, like maybe astrology, as we'll get into. But my real interest, or one of my big interests in Bitcoin, is well, Bitcoin in the humanities, is developing Web3 digital humanities. So Web2 digital humanities was this great movement. It still is the majority. Everyone, when you refer to digital humanities, you usually refer to Web2. But there's a lot of problems with it, as you talk about with decentralizing time in the Ephemera project, which is will be a question I dig into. Web3 digital humanities decentralizes the humanities in ways that Web2 can't, right?
Hmm.
It's all the, regular internet has all the paywalls. It can be blocked, it can be censored. Writing about various aspects and events in history are regularly blocked by various governments and other institutions. So we need Web3, and I think in particular Bitcoin, to really take the digital humanities to the next level. Everything that we wanted it to be, open access, open knowledge, uh, providing opportunities equally across the world, and basically decentralizing knowledge, decentralizing power. And we can't do that with the regular internet. And so that's what I teach. I run a course every semester on Bitcoin, every spring semester on Bitcoin and Jewish history, which we write history on Bitcoin with ordinals and other inscriptions. So your work in the Ephemera project is naturally very, very, very interesting to me. And I'm really, especially when we talked about briefly before in person about archaeology. But the first thing I wanted to ask you is just this about Web3 digital humanities. Do you see the Ephemera project as a humanities project, as a digital humanities project? Is
Yeah, I do, and I can start by sort of explaining what I did and how I got to the ephemera project. So, I sort of refer to it as like a community archaeology project, or like we're trying to make archaeological primary source documents that could be seen later, like a
Mhm,
time capsule or something like that.
mhm,
And so to give a little bit of context, so, Bitcoin is this economic system, right? We can send Bitcoins to each other and we can use that as money. We can use it as a store of value like we would gold. But it's also a database. And this is a surprisingly controversial idea within the Bitcoin community, which I won't get into because it's sort of its own tangent. But it is, right? So, when you make a Bitcoin transaction, you can say things in the Bitcoin transaction like, I'd like to send this amount to this person. And those are sort of necessary economic data that makes Bitcoin transfer here and there. But you can also put arbitrary data in Bitcoin transactions. This could be a random string of numbers, or it could be an image, or it could be something that's used technically, but not for Bitcoin itself. So there's a lot of L2s and side chains and sort of scaling technology that's interested in maybe putting information from their chain onto Bitcoin as sort of like a regular check in. So there's like some technical use for the storage of arbitrary data, which is part of why arbitrary data is allowed to exist on Bitcoin at all, or why it was set up that way.
mhm,
But you can use it for kind of whatever you want. And so one of the things that I was really interested in with the advent of ordinals and inscriptions, which was basically just a simple way to track this format and track this arbitrary data. So, if you want to do an image like an NFT, which, was very popular on other chains, but never came to Bitcoin because Bitcoin didn't have the technology to do NFTs natively, you could put an image on Bitcoin, you would have a tracker to that image. But I was actually never really that interested in the NFT side of it. I mean, it's fun, it's an interesting sort of, like, subculture of the internet, it's sort of fascinating for those reasons. But to me, the thing that was always interesting about the idea of being able to format and trace arbitrary data on Bitcoin was to be able to record things that were important. So, we think that the internet is written in ink. People always say, "Don't post things that, you don't want someone to see later down the line," whatever. That's kind of true on this very temporary timeline, like on a 5 to 10-year timeline. But if you think about websites that you visited even 10 years ago, a lot of them don't exist anymore. And if you wanted to go back to the work that you did on any of those websites or the things that you posted or, really anything that you wanted to have permanence, it's very, very hard to find anywhere in digital space to put permanent documents, things that you really want to last and to stand this test of time. And so, when you think about, okay, let's say that you're an archaeologist 1,000 years in the future, or like an alien coming to Earth after some big civilizational collapse, whatever you want to imagine. Imagine that we've had some sort of disruption in history, or what's happening right now is not completely documented and known by some future civilization or whatever. How would you try to understand what happened in the digital world? Like, it would be very, very difficult to try to unearth some of the things that have happened online that we think are very important to our culture and to, like, the digital world that we're building out. It turns out that Bitcoin is this very robust, sort of largely decentralized, downloaded in its entirety data archive of our time. It's kind of the best, honestly, data archive of our time. And I don't think people really realize this or appreciate that.
mhm,
But if you want to have, let's say you have some document that you think is of historical importance, or it's just really important to you, or whatever you think it is, and you wanted to preserve it, the best way to do that would be to put it in a Bitcoin transaction, like put it onto the Bitcoin blockchain because Bitcoin is downloaded in its entirety by every person that runs a Bitcoin node or that mines Bitcoin all around the world. And so it's kind of this like very nice mix of, it's being downloaded regularly. Like they have to keep updating. They can't just download it once and then only use that. They always have to be updating it for new information. You can't use a truncated version. You have to use the entire version in order to validate new blocks. Um, and it's everywhere, right? Anywhere, anyone around the world. And so it's not a guarantee that this will last if there's some sort of like apocalypse that wipes out our whole civilization or the internet or whatever. But if you wanted to have something digital that could be robust in that way, I think Bitcoin would be the place to do it. So that was sort of like the the first thing that I realized that kind of led me to the ephemera project is I was like, okay, we have this interesting opportunity to write history, basically. And I'm actually curious, I'll sort of ask you about this after I finish explaining the project. There's this interesting aspect of like people always say the winners write history, right? The winners are the ones who write history. History is subjective and it's all about like whoever is writing the narrative and from what perspective. And so from my perspective, inscribing data onto Bitcoin and putting whatever narrative you want onto Bitcoin, you're sort of being the winner that writes history. And that doesn't necessarily mean that what you write is true, right? It's just you're writing it. And if that's the document that survives, then that will become canonical truth. So that's just like a very interesting kind of philosophical thing. As I said, I would love to like go off on that tangent after this. But the thing that felt like I could sort of fill in that puzzle was so I came from the world of academia in astronomy, actually, before all this. So I was doing astronomy research, looking at the planets all the time, and then sort of a long story, but I got into astrology and then got into Bitcoin. You know how life goes.
Mhm.
And so when I was trying to figure out, what would be the thing that I could document on this primary source document, what would be the contribution I could make? I realized that there wasn't a very good source of time on Bitcoin. So when you mine a Bitcoin block, there is a timestamp that's in the block header, which is a string of numbers that is the number of seconds that since January 1st, 1970, I believe, which is the beginning of computer time or like UTC time. So that number computers can read and they can say, "Oh, okay, it's November 26th, 2025, whatever." But imagine again, you're this alien or this future archaeologist, you want to understand what time this document existed. Like that string of numbers is meaningless to you. And even if you could interpret it, November 26th, 2025 might also be meaningless to you. Like there's no sort of I guess what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like primary tether between that and a universal reality. That's a system that we've created that if you don't have that system, you don't necessarily know what the meaning of a year is, a month is, a day. But the motion of the planetary objects is kind of the universal thing. And our calendar used to be a lot more based on the motion of planetary objects. It's a little inconvenient because the moon cycle is 28 and a half days. And so there were all these reasons why we moved away from using like an astronomical calendar. But you can still use that now, right? Like I can look up in the sky and say, okay, the sun is directly above. That must mean it's midday or approximately midday. The moon is full. That means I'm at this point in the month. Or the sun is setting very early. That must mean that I'm at the end of the year. And so I had this thought of, okay, why don't I try to inscribe the motion of planetary objects onto Bitcoin such that it creates a time link between astronomical time, which is something that no matter where you are in the future, even where you are in the solar system, you could center it on Earth and kind of figure it out from there. It's essentially this like first principles decentralized way of creating a timestamp. And so what I did was with Ephemera, which is the project where I kind of put all this together in like a packaged way for people to participate, was I allowed people to pick dates or and times that they thought were significant. Maybe it was the day their child was born. Maybe it was something that was relevant to Bitcoin's history or to the world history. And I would find sats, which are just the smallest unit of Bitcoin, the smallest denomination from that date. And then I would inscribe the exact position of the planets onto that sat. So you basically create this digital artifact that is a time link between Bitcoin block time and decentralized astronomical time. And I felt like that was like my contribution I could make to the decentralized primary source document. So yeah, that's ephemera. I'm happy to answer any questions about that. But I'm also curious just to hear your take on this idea of what truth is in this context, because that's something that people always sort of talk about when I bring up this idea of this being this primary source document is they're like, "Oh my gosh, we can decentralize truth and this is such a great way to have truth spread everywhere." And I'm like, "Well, actually it's just a way for everyone to choose personally whether they want to be truthful or to lie, right? If anyone has the opportunity to write their take in history, then history becomes this sort of interesting. I don't know, like, I don't know how truth emerges from that, or truth looks very different maybe than how it's been formed in the past. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
I do, probably too many. I do. I want to go. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll just like I had this. I actually had the same question for you. What is truth? In the ephemera project, and for you, which we can. maybe I'll jump back a little bit and then go forward to it. I wrote this book years and years ago on this philosopher Alain Badiou, an illustrated introduction to his philosophy. His philosophy is based around the idea of truth procedures. How do we create truth? So, and for me as a historian, there's no such thing as non-factual truth, right? Because all truth, like you were talking about it with subjectivity, everything is subjective. It's sort of you hear it a lot in academia, but it's true in the sense that uh, that truth is the product of a process, right? So you determine what is evidence, and then you have a facticity process that turns that evidence into facts, and then you narrate those facts into a truth. And the facticity process is different. There's so many different ones. Right? I don't know how many, endless amounts. And so, in that sense, I would say that there's no such thing as a non-factual truth. It's just that we disagree on the different facticity processes. Right? I'll say I don't agree that what you're presenting are facts.
Mm.
Because your process for creating them from what you just determine as evidence is not valid for me. But it but structurally, truth is always the product of that process. So when I say that to students that religion is science and history is science and everything is science, and they really get sometimes frustrated at that, this is what I mean at that idea. And once we realize that it's the facticity point in that process that we all disagree about, then we can start to have some honest conversations about how many different facticity models we each use every day, right? We come to different truths in all different ways. We create truths by, yeah. So I would say, yeah. I wrote this little piece on Bitcoin as value, which relates to truth, in this something called the Bitcoin Gazette, which is a on-chain newspaper for Bitcoin using inscriptions. Uh, but yeah, so I have a lot to say on truth, and I want to get more into it in a minute, which it relates also to thermal radiation and Bitcoin mining, which is the next step for you. For me, I'm curious where ephemera goes with that, but um, yeah, what was I gonna say? On the winners, right? This I'm telling students all the time. This, right? Like, if you're don't you want to be the winner? Like if we are the first one to write history on Bitcoin, right? Then this is and Bitcoin wins is for all the reasons you said, why it's better, is that means that you're shaping the future. And history is just like money. It's, it's in like, the past is not real in the sense that past is just an abstraction, just like computer machine code is not real, or software is not real. It's an abstraction that we then use some physical thing to connect to, or some mathematics or some theory to connect to. Past is just that abstract object by which history creates reality. And so there's never one single version of it. It's there's always these different ones. And so it's always subjective in that way, and always, yes, there's always winners. And that's why I propose for the students too. Maybe we should just get rid of history. And because if we get rid of history, we get rid of this. History is always a tool of power, period. And there's no way to do it in any other way. So it's always dominating. And so I think of, why do we even need past? Why should we use past as a grounding for our future realities? Maybe we should stop doing that. And all the major religions do it, right? At least the ones that I know and teach: Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Past is is the founding abstract for all of them. Without past, they don't have any theology on which to stand. All their stories and truths develop from that. So, I think that, and I agree with you completely. I mean, this is what we do in my classes, that we inscribe his pasts onto the chain precisely because it's so secure. and is the best form and safest form that we've created so far. And it's also transplanetary, right? It's already there are nodes on the moon, right? So the project that sent them up to the moon. So I don't know history sitting on in any other form on the moon, and I don't see that happening. So yeah, so I agree. And it's amazing to hear what you're saying, because that's what we're doing on campus is using these inscriptions exactly to write history for all the reasons that you mentioned. And sorry, getting over a cold for anyone who doesn't know. Uh, okay. On so many questions on time here. Uh, but in the interest of time, all right, let me try to deep dive into this one idea related to this. Hold with me for a second here. All right. Do you know much about quantum physics?
I mean, not more than, you look at it and it looks different than if you don't look at it, and, the sort of, like, spiritual and philosophical implications of that, but I'm not a quantum physicist, like, I couldn't write an equation about it.
Well, neither am I. So I'm a historian. So that's my I think we're probably on the same level there anyways. Okay, so I'm wondering if past is like ephemeris data, in the sense that past is wave function, you
Mm.
right? And that it exists in superposition. So what that means is basically that past is all possibilities. Right, so that's what wave function is, all possibilities existing somewhere in space in superposition. And it becomes like you were talking about observation, some past, when it's observed, collapses into one location. That's why think about the ephemeris data that you talk about with this. And so, but what happens, at least with multi-world theory, which I believe is true, is that all historical possibilities have emerged. So, like, when you create an inscription inside Ephemera project, doing that basically collapses the wave function of the ephemeris data and creates all astrological possibilities, but they're not visible in this world. Only one is visible in this world because, by other laws in quantum physics, we can only see one world, one reality at a time. So, okay, the second part is then, therefore, that every time that we write history, like onto sats, for instance, or every time we inscribe, then we are effectively altering all possible worlds. If that makes sense. And that the more we inscribe or the more we write history, the closer we get to narrowing our reality and understanding our reality. So I'm
It
wondering if is that like, that's how I see, like, the ephemera collection building over time. Like, it's narrowing our reality in a positive sense of continually separating us out. It it's constantly recreating all the many realities while continuing to narrow which the reality that we're in. So it's not just an Ornos collection. It's something that's altering the foundations of universal reality, I think.
Yeah,
Maybe.
in actually, like, a pretty mundane physical way, you're actually totally right, like, as well, in the sense that, so one of the problems with modeling planetary orbits in general is you might have heard of the three-body problem. This is, like, a common phrase that comes up sometimes. I think there's a popular book written, like a novel called Three-Body Problem, something like that. The three-body problem in physics or in astronomy is basically that if you have two objects, like where one is orbiting the other or whatever, it's pretty easy to model that relationship into perpetuity. But as soon as
Mm,
you have a third object that's pulling in a different direction, it becomes
mm,
unstable and it becomes very difficult to model that system. And
mm,
so if you imagine like our system, we have the sun at the center, and that's a pretty strong gravitational pull. But the planets are also all pulling on each other, and then they all have moons that are pulling on each other, and the planets are pulling on the moons, and then there's space debris. There's all this stuff. Everything has a gravitational pull. So it's very difficult if you just wanted to create a physics model of the solar system and then model out the motion of the planets into perpetuity, you couldn't do it because there's too much instability. And so the reason why we're able to model the planets over time, with an ephemeris, which is what ephemera is named after. The word ephemeris just means like of the moment, of the day. So, an ephemeris transit, an ephemera object, ephemera as like objects, maybe like ticket stubs, that kind of thing. It's these sort of ephemeral pieces of data, of moments in time or whatever. Um, it's really only through past observation that we're able to model future motion of the planet. So let's say that I have a snapshot of the planets right now, and I know where Mars is, I know where the Earth is, I know where Venus is, etc. Even if I know all of the physics, I know the mass, I know the velocity that they're traveling, I know all this stuff, I can't model their motion into perpetuity just based on the physics. The
Mm,
models that we have for the future motion of the planetary objects is based off of past observations. So let's say I have the snapshot right now and I have a snapshot 5 days ago. And I can see then, okay, so the Earth moved here. Okay, and I can map out that orbit over time. Okay. And so basically what we do is we look at all these past observations and we use those to form an observation of or a prediction for what we think will happen in the future. And of course, that's generally right in the sense that the ephemeris um, predictions that we make, the models that we make for the future position of the planets, has generally played out to be true. But the only reason why we know it is because we have these past observations. So it's predicting the future based off the past. So just even on like a very not even getting into kind of the quantum or sort of like philosophical implications of your question, which are interesting but difficult to answer, obviously. Even just, if I had just inscribed one data point and said, "Okay, here's where the planets were at this exact time, on Bitcoin block time. Here's where the planets were." You could look at that and you could if you had a current, let's say 1,000 years in the future, if you had a current model, you could trace back maybe if your model was good, which we would hope it would be good if they're able to, get Bitcoin at all, but they can't model it out from there. It's only with the addition of more ephemeris objects, which is like the more inscriptions that we make. We ended up making 333 total inscriptions. It's
mhm.
only with the addition of other data points spread out over time that you can actually make a good model where you can project forward and backward for where the planets are. So there's like, you kind of asked like, do you collapse like the wave field basically by making these observations and like just on a very basic modeling level, like yes, you have to collapse the wave field. You have to add in all these data points that are these moments of observation in order to be able to tell the future and the past, right? So it's like it's an interesting example of that I think, philosophically is very interesting, but it doesn't probably occur to a lot of astronomers when they're doing it that's the way that their models work. That's the way that they're able to tell the future is by concretizing the present and the past.
Yeah, there's a historian or philosopher, depending on your point of view, this guy, Foucault, who said that history is the foundation of the sciences. And so this kind of reminds me of that, right? That you need past to predict future in some way, despite historians always rejecting that notion and scientists rejecting that history can do such a thing. But it gets me on the question of, decentralizing time, which you talk about as well in the project. Okay, I'll get to the less philosophical version of the question first. Like, is Bitcoin like calendar time? Is it decentralized? Really? I mean, I see all your points, right? But like the Gregorian calendar, it was made by people. And all the timestamps are products of human generated transactions or maybe AI, some of them. Uh, yeah, so I'm just thinking like it doesn't mean we can't reach that it isn't decentralized. I'm just curious your thoughts because to me it sounds a lot like or more like Roman religion or ancient religions that are polytheistic, something that's Augustine of Hippo really hated in his book City of God against the pagans. That he said pagans create the gods out of materiality, so their cities create gods. In Christianity, gods create cities. That was a big thing. So Yeah, so I'm curious, like, are we I guess 2 things. One, do you see that as a possible route to decentralization? Our finite, centralized origin of something can lead to a decentralized structure? And, maybe, if this is more like polytheism or some other new form of religion.
Yeah, let me try to explain how I see Bitcoin time. And I think you probably have more of the historical context to be able to tell me like, "Oh, that sounds like this model," or "That sounds like," like, so let me just try to explain how I see it. So, I would say Bitcoin block time is decentralized, but its timestamp is centralized. Like, its form of timekeeping is centralized and imperfect. And so just to explain to people how this works, so the way that Bitcoin mining works, when you're mining new Bitcoin blocks, which is adding to the chain of blocks, the blockchain, um, the way that this works is this new block that's being formed has a secret key. And so that imagine it's like a number. Imagine it's 42. If you just say 42 to the block, it says, great, you've unlocked the key, you've mined all these transactions, you get the block reward, and you get all the fees that people paid for this transaction. But there's no way of knowing the secret key. So basically Bitcoin is holding the block and saying, okay, until someone guesses 42, I'm not going to unlock this block. And all of the miners all around the world are just guessing random numbers. I mean, this is like a oversimplification, but it's also literally how this works. The miner might be saying, "Oh, I think it's 2. No, no, I think it's 20. No, I think it's 500. No, no, no," and they're all guessing, and they're just sending their guesses over and over, and they're sending their guesses to each other as well. And Bitcoin is waiting and waiting and waiting, and then all of a sudden, some random miner says, "Is it 42?" And Bitcoin says, "Yep, it's 42." And that block gets mined, and everyone realizes not only is the block mined, but they also get the answer. They go, "Oh, it's 42. It's 42. It's 42. You got that too? Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. It's 42." And then they move on to the next block. And the way that Bitcoin works is every 2 weeks we sort of decide we decide kind of on this like human level that we'd like for the blocks to come approximately every 10 minutes. So that's like a decision that we've made arbitrarily from the technology. It's sort of a technical decision. It's kind of more of an economic decision of like we want transactions to build up for that period of time and then for them to get mined and move to the next one. It's like good for decentralization of the network. But we decide we want it to take about 10 minutes to guess that number. And so every 2 weeks, we readjust the difficulty of the problem. And so we say, okay, like, and this is what cryptography, the cryptography aspect of Bitcoin is like. We just make it a more difficult cryptography problem to solve. And so basically, we have the system where, everyone is sort of all agreeing that this is the exact time, this is the moment that someone guessed the right number. And we all see it and we all agree on it. How we decide to record that guess, using a timestamp is I think that's more the issue is that, like, we don't have a great way of all recording that moment together, but when it happens, everyone agrees that it happens, and so I think the decentralized aspect comes in terms of this, like, sort of it's almost like a stochastic kind of, like, cryptographic timestamp in a way where it's like, how long did it take all of these miners to solve this cryptographic problem? And it's approximately 10 minutes, but if you look at Bitcoin blocks, you'll see that it's not usually 10 minutes, sometimes it's 2 seconds, sometimes it's 40 minutes, like, it can be a huge range of times, and that's just because it's random. It's a random cryptographic problem to solve. So, I don't know, like, what that would look like. I don't know, I'm not, like, familiar enough with the history of timekeeping or these sort of philosophical approaches to time, but I just think there's something interesting there where it's like, it's not the best way to keep time in the sense that you probably wouldn't want to, like, decide to meet up with someone based on Bitcoin block time, or you wouldn't wanna start a lecture based on Bitcoin block time. But the nice thing about it is that it's very robust in terms of everyone says, "Yes, I agree." Like, I also say that this happened at this time, and I'm gonna check that it happened, and we're gonna move on to the next one. And so there's this aspect of like decentralized agreement of yes, we're all recognizing the same moment. Yes, we're all recognizing the same moment. So I don't know, like I just think that's interesting. Like I don't know if that's useful or what it's useful for, but it does feel like it's like a new form of timekeeping or at least new to our current civilization's timekeeping that yeah, I don't know what to make of it, honestly.
No, one of the things, I I'm sorry, I'm a academic, I say things like this in one of my old books, but I talk a lot about how, my historical expertise is late antiquity, fall of the Roman Empire, the rise of the early Middle Ages, and it before in that period, there were many different calendars that people lived by, and a lot of the documents that we have, the manuscripts, people will record time and they'll have 3 different calendars, and they'll have, like, a Christian one and a Byzantine one and other ones, and so there wasn't one single calendar. There wasn't a concept like we have today of just past in the past, and I think that's because of our scientific understanding, imagination of space-time, and so on. But that idea that there's just the past, there's a timeline where just things were, that's a very modern idea. And, the ancient world had many, many different calendars, and the Romans didn't have even one continuous one, right? So one tribune or whatever position would, the person would leave their position, they would date documents by the next one that came in, and, like, there's no concept that, like, we're going towards something. That's a Judeo-Christian idea that we're moving towards something, that this has purpose, that, there's, like, a timeline towards something.
Mm.
So that's a totally, again, modern, or maybe not modern, that part of it, that's a Jewish and Christian, and later Muslim, idea. So I really like this idea, and I like how you talk about in the project that astrology kind of offers, and astronomy, I guess, offers sort of a natural, decentralized time frame, or clock, versus the calendar that we've created, like Gregorian or any other calendar, that we create. And but I think, like, how do we actually conceive that ultimately, in a, because it's like natural versus, um, I don't know, technological, right? I mean, Bitcoin is not the natural phenomenon. It is in the sense that it's an expression of mathematics, and mathematics is the foundation of truth and life and being. Uh, but it was created, and we know it was created. So to me, it sounds a lot like transhumanism, the
Mm.
imagination of humans becoming a blending, a hybrid of the technological and or the organic and the inorganic, creating a new advanced form of being, kind of like Nietzsche's Übermensch, but without the political and baggage and historical, trauma, of that idea. So, but I wonder, I wonder if we can think of Bitcoin's time as, like you were saying, decentralized and yet centralized, in the sense of, sorry to bring up more philosophers, problem in academia. There's this guy Deleuze who wrote this book
Mhm.
called,
Yeah, Deleuze and Guattari, I'm
yeah,
familiar with.
alright, great. We're on the same page here. And uh, capitalism and schizophrenia. And in capitalist schizophrenia, the whole idea is talking about reimagining time as arborescent. So sorry, as rhizomatic. So
Mm.
time has long been thought of as this arborescent. Like, there's a beginning point where a transaction happens and everything grows out from there. And it's
Uh-huh.
weird because when we write history on Bitcoin, we kind of do that. Like, it can create the parent inscription, and then all the child inscriptions and all the delegates. And I can put like one historical event like Bar Kokhba revolt, and then I can have all the different evidence, all the different historic everything. So it's kind of replicating the old way of arborescent, like growing like a tree in the roots and all that. But inside a system that is rhizomatic, which is like a rhizome that the information is just coming, like you were saying, where with the mining process, it's random,
Yeah, that's exactly what I was gonna
totally
say. It's like
random.
that's a rhizomatic process of timekeeping as well, right? Where we all sort of we speak to each other, we speak to our neighbors, basically. We say like, "Okay, did you see this? Yeah, yeah, I saw this. Okay, yeah, yeah, we all agree." It's this yeah, it is totally like the rhizomatic
Yeah.
structure.
So I think what you're, I mean, again, I see the project, in what you're doing is, is maybe not returning to anything, but actually creating a whole new sense, a whole new concept of time, grounded in a new technology, and Bitcoin is that foundation for an entirely different, well, ontology, I guess. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, honestly, one of the things I think about a lot, um, trying to understand the present and what we're going through right now is just that we don't have that many points of reference in the past to look at for a lot of what's happening now. And I think that that's probably unique to our time. I'm sure there's been times of a lot of upheaval and chaos and change throughout history, but it's probably a handful, and we might be number 1 still, like, right now in digital time, I don't know. So, it's very difficult to look at the past and to look at the way that things were done in the past and use them as wisdom for how things should be done now, and I think, um, you brought up, like, transhumanism as an example, like, part of what is happening with Bitcoin is I think Bitcoin is kind of it's a technology that responds to and transforms the people that are a part of it. Like, the way that Bitcoin works and the reason why it works so well is because it's not trying to be an idealized form of currency. Like, it's responding to natural human incentives that we might think are dark, like our incentive towards greed or selfishness or our tendency to lie to each other if there's a reward to lie, all these things that are just a part of us, even if we, try to create religions, for example, to encourage people to not be that way or whatever. Bitcoin sort of accepts people as they are in a way and kind of says, okay, here's how I can take all of those sort of negative incentives and transform them into a system where it's hard for you to use to do those things. And so you create like a trustless system. That's always the thing Bitcoin people talk about is that
Mm.
you don't need trust to participate in Bitcoin. You don't need faith. You participate in it and it works because of who you are, but then it also sort of transforms you as well. So it's like, I don't know, I'm not sure that there's ever been something like that in history, and I think part of it is, like, that we're more connected than ever, the rhizomatic structure, it's like there's just all these ways that you can move through that are sort of nonlinear and non-hierarchical and ways that you can connect with other people. I mean, I don't even really have, like, a point I'm trying to make here, but really, like, I just in pondering a lot of these things, I think you're right that a lot of this stuff is new. Like, it's not a reworking of things that have happened in the past. It's not a return to X, Y, or Z. It's pure new. And I always tell people that, like, the digital realm is this thing that we're building out that we're walking around in with blindfolds with our hands out trying to, like, figure out when we run up against a wall or when we fall off a cliff or when we discover this whole new thing. Like, we have no idea what the rules and laws are within the digital realm, and they seem to be very different than the laws of the physical realm. And I think science does a great job, for the most part, describing the laws of the physical realm. But I think now that we're in this sort of era where we're shaping technology and technology is shaping us, which I think is like the sort of philosophical root of transhumanism, it's almost like reality is being shaped by this realm where the rules of our reality don't apply as much. And so it becomes difficult to try to understand the world around us through just like a purely materialist physical reality understanding. But I
Mhm.
don't know what to make of that. Like, I have that thought, and then I'm like, I don't know what to do with that, I think we're all, like, getting little pieces of that puzzle, like, those of us that are trying to understand this.
Yeah, that's why I always hope that other academics or other historians of in academia or not in academia, wherever, will start to pick up on this because we need so much conversation. We need so many discussions, and there's just not enough of it out there because of perceptions about Bitcoin and academia and scholarship and so on. But yeah, I mean, something I talk about with students is this idea of like anyway, you were saying like the rewards for lying. Like Bitcoin, it doesn't reward you for lying or making a false transaction. And so I think like you're saying, like it can change the very structure and essence of society.
Mhm.
And, like, what does it mean? What is religion, for instance, like, or any major social system like in a peer-to-peer world? what we don't have that. It's a what is it like in a decentralized world? And because I teach also religious studies as a historian, and I teach as a scholar the religious text, the New Testament has some very interesting stuff about that. When Jesus says to render unto Caesar, I always read that to me, and he says screw fiat. So he's like the first Bitcoin
Yeah,
with
he's like, "End the Fed."
exactly. That's the real Jesus right there. It's his real
I'm
message.
curious, are you familiar with, the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius? I talk about it sometimes, I don't know if you've, like, heard me talk about it, but, like, the astrological ages, which are just the precession of the equinoxes,
Mhm.
that's an astronomical thing, like, astrology is just an additional interpretation on top of astronomical fact or, like, what we see going on in the solar system. So, the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, these are astronomical ages that then astrologers ascribe meaning to, but
Mhm.
loosely speaking, the age of Pisces begins with the birth of Jesus Christ,
Mhm.
and then these ages last 2,000 years, and we're now entering the age of Aquarius, and Aquarius is the sign of decentralization. It's about being an individual within a network of other individuals and not compromising your individuality in order to form community and interact with them. The
Mhm.
age of Pisces, which has been like the last 2,000 years, is about martyrdom. It's about, kind of like surrendering yourself to a higher thing. So, I think the phrase like religion is the opiate of the masses is like a really good
Mhm.
sort of dig at like the quintessential problem of the age of Pisces. But Jesus is also this like Piscean figure, like the Christian fish, it's like the Pisces symbol and like the martyrdom of Christ in general is this very Piscean archetype. And I don't know if you're, like, familiar with that at all, but I feel like that's also part of the kind of new thing that's emerging now that we don't have the language to speak about is, like, we're entering into this age where the power structure and the very organization of our minds and the way we relate to each other is fundamentally different than the age from Christ until now, from 0 BC to now.
0
Um
BC.
yeah, I guess 0 whatever, no AD or BC. Uh, yeah, and I don't know, yeah, I feel like that's part of it as well. It's just like, that whole era was informed by Judeo-Christian values, and that was like that's the soup that we were swimming in, and now we're in a totally different. I think, like, Deleuze and Guattari were totally right to describe it as rhizomatic. It's like that's why I know those philosophers, even though I'm not really a philosophy person, is because that was, like, a very prescient thing for them to observe about the structure of this age.
Mhm.
Um and it changes everything. I think it's non-hierarchical, and decentralized, but that also doesn't mean that it's perfect and utopian. I think people tend to jump to that where they're like, "Oh, we're gonna dissolve the power structures and everything's gonna be great." There will certainly be improvements, I think it's as I said, Bitcoin sort of takes things and transforms them into a better version for our incentives with one another, but like, we're gonna have different problems, we're gonna have different solutions, and you brought up the Ubermensch earlier, and I think about that a lot too in terms of, um, the conditions through which the Ubermensch could arise is kind of our reality right now, like, you have access to anything you would want to learn, any information that's available for you to better yourself or to know everything or whatever, it's technically all there for you. The challenge is that, like, the distractions and everything else sort of suck you into a lower version of yourself, and so I also think even, like, that idea of the Ubermensch emerging is also part of, like, the age of Aquarius, where it's like,
Yeah.
we will have these superhumans that figure out how to integrate with technology or to use technology to become greater people than they would otherwise, but, like, not everyone I don't know, it's like it's a really weird like,
That's the
that
thing,
can
like
get pretty dark pretty fast,
it
right?
does. It's like, because Bitcoin is also limited in transaction
Yep.
abilities and size and the blocks and so on, and that matches the Catholic notion of grace that not everybody's gonna get it, but also philosophical is like the Dasein and Heidegger that not everyone's gonna be able to get there, like some people will get it, some won't, most won't. And so but it's a dark kind of thinking because it's really not enlightening in that we're all going to progress and so on. It's like, yeah, uh,
But
Maybe
that's also, just to do very basic astrology, that is also the crux of Aquarius is a very high-minded individual, very intellectual individual, but Aquarians can also often find themselves victim to a superiority complex where they're isolated because they think they're better than everyone and they don't know how to relate to people because they're existing in this like idea space that's above everything else and they can be sort of heartless and disconnected from their emotions. So I also think that kind of, if Pisces in the age of Pisces with Jesus, the tendency was to like, be like, I don't want to think of like just give up my power to something greater than me. I don't want to think about all these things. Aquarius's response to that is like, I'm God.
Mhm.
It's almost this sort of superiority thing. So yeah, I also see that playing out just astrologically speaking.
So it
And
is.
we're just at the beginning. It's literally like we're at the beginning of a 2000-year era.
Yeah.
So it's just unfolding and taking shape.
So it is very Zarathustra in that sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, I think though that not to go too down the theological path for people, but yeah, I think that that's actually I agree with you that that's how the age is has led, and that's what the history. Well, it's a historical situation of Christianity, but the teachings were very different, and the teachings offered a decentralized idea. And I think that Bitcoin is a fulfillment of money as it's discussed in the New Testament as something that is
Mm.
not controlled by anyone, and why Jesus changes the Old Testament completely when the Old Testament says not to blaspheme God or the Lord, which is my favorite class to teach because I can just keep saying God and Jesus and oh Christ, but and the students that's why I know students are getting more religious because every year I do it, they get more and more offended. But so but yeah, I mean, he's he's teaching. He said you can blaspheme God, you can blaspheme me. Doesn't really matter. Just don't blaspheme the Holy Spirit, which is the power of the community, and why all the community gave up. You had to be what we would today call communist. You had to give up all your wealth. You couldn't be a Christian and have wealth. So, and these are ideas repeated throughout the New Testament. So, no, yeah, so and when Jesus is asked, "When are you coming back?" Which is one of, like, the biggest understated questions of all time, I guess, but in the book, he says, "When man is woman and woman is man and neither is man nor woman, the end of all binaries," which is, stick that to traditional Christians, uh, so I think it's almost like I hope that well, it feels like the age of Aquarius is more appropriate age of that teaching from 2,000 years ago, and I hope that that's not gonna be repeated with Satoshi and Bitcoin, that we won't be able to fulfill that mission, but 2,000 years from now, we'll be ready to. Uh, so, alright, couple more questions for you, and I'll let you go here. Oh, stuff on the materiality, and the immaterial, the finite and infinite, but okay. Um, try to skip through some stuff, but on the I have so much, we could go for hours. Okay, just a little bit on the mining here, and then back to the question of truth, and then one last question for you. So, alright, what do you think about this idea? Uh, so Bitcoin mining, right, it creates, thermal radiation, like our bodies do, like anything giving off heat does. And you can turn thermal radiation, you can convert it into electricity. Okay, basic ideas. So, but, okay, so if new data is manifest as thermal radiation, so the data that's going on to the Bitcoin blockchain, right? That's now becoming thermal radiation that is converted into electricity. Now, when that electricity is a product of Bitcoin astrology, would we be recycling spiritual energy, and therefore astrology on chain is necessary for sustaining the cosmic energy balance of Bitcoin?
It's a good question. Um, Gosh, I have, like, so many different directions I could go with this. So, I'll answer in a way that maybe is like a total non sequitur, but I'll try to bring it back. I think something I've noticed for people that are on a seeking path, if they're trying to understand the mysteries of the universe, whether that's from a spiritual perspective, a scientific perspective, whatever, you want to know the things that haven't been known and you want to be able to connect the concepts that haven't been connected.
Boom.
One of the things that I think is consistently given advice for people that are on that path, and that I would advise for anyone that's on that path, is that you have to find ways to balance the hot air that's like going around in your head. It's like if you think about, and I think of it as hot air because astrology deals with the four elements, which are fire, air, water, and earth. And so I think of kind of a lot of that seeking, a lot of that knowledge concept connection as being passion with information and intellect, which is fire and air. And so you kind of are like, steaming almost like you have all this like heat that's coming off of you. And the solution to not get overheated, to not basically like fry your brain to the point where you're a crazy person who can't connect any concepts, is to ground yourself, whether that's water or earth, that can be like literally just standing on grass or going into a body of water, whatever, just sort of engaging with more grounded energies that kind of can dissipate and can absorb that energy. So, when you ask about like the spiritual energy being transmuted into heat and like collected and all that, it makes me think of that where it's kind of like I think as humans, we're not going to be able to be the all-knowing God that maybe we strive for. Like, we're closer to, like, Icarus flying too close to the sun and, like, getting burned and then, coming back down. There's sort of this, like, constant, I think, like, reaching up and then getting sort of smited down, and I think if you are able to integrate that grounding process more consciously, you actually are able to, like, fly higher. That's kind of, I think, the lesson of, temperance and balance, and that is, like, sort of a virtue. Um, but yeah, I think there's like kind of this aspect of like if we push too far in any direction, like you can view Bitcoin as this very like materialist, anti-spiritual sort of like we don't need any masters or gods. We can like rule ourselves as sovereign individuals. Like it can definitely go in that direction. But if it goes too far in that direction and loses its heart, I don't think that it will last. Like I think that the spiritual side of it is coming with it. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, I could go in a whole other direction about, like, sun worship and, like, the sun as being, like, a source of heat and energy, and, like, we want to, like, become closer to the sun, but we can't because like, our bodies won't allow us to. Our
Okay,
bodies, which are mostly water, like,
Bitcoin
it's.
miners are basically our desire to get back to the sun. So basically, we're revitalizing basically Amun Ra and Egyptian.
Exactly, yeah, Egyptian sun worship, yeah, that's exactly where I was gonna go with it. Yeah, my solution is, Bitcoin mining heated hot springs. So you gotta have the miners cooling off in water, and then people
Mhm.
can bathe in the hot springs, and I think that's a pretty, like, spiritually integrated system.
Yeah, my sister is now building a yoga and art studio for kids that is heated by Bitcoin
Oh,
mining.
really? No way, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
on
That's
the beach.
awesome.
Uh, and so we're trying to also tap into the energy from the tides.
Mhm.
I don't know exactly how we're gonna do it, but kind of like everything in Bitcoin, you kind of figure it out.
Yep.
You don't know anything,
True.
and you're like, "What?" And then you just dive into it and figure it out.
Yeah.
So yeah. But do you assign any like, or I mean, you generally or ephemera project any symbolic value to all the data that's created, like something like gematria in Judaism, if you know, like numerology, and yeah, just giving symbolic value to the different data in
Yeah, the
mathematics.
the
Yeah.
reason why I wanted to have it be that other people would select it, and essentially the way that it worked when I was minting the ephemera pieces is that, like, a certain number of the highest bidders would get to inscribe their dates, and so it was sort of this, like, market-driven community project where you could bid to get the opportunity basically to memorialize the date that you think is important. And the reason why I wanted to do it that way is because when I was thinking about, okay, what dates should we inscribe? Like, there's different ways to think about it. You could try to do time spaced, where like every month you have one so that you have this kind of consistent ledger of timestamps that you could piece together very uniformly. Okay, there's like some value to that, but it's a little dry, you know? As an astrologer, I'm like, "Ooh, well, I would love to inscribe interesting astrological moments," right? Like planetary conjunctions or eclipses, stuff like that, because that's what's interesting to me, and that feels like also something that they could model back and know that they got the right time because they're like, "Oh, wow, that time was, an eclipse, or it was
Mm.
an exact, conjunction of these planets." So that's, it's something that they can sort of identify. Um but that's just my perspective, right? And there's maybe other arguments that you could make for other different reasons why different times would be interesting. So
Mhm.
what I found was by opening it up to people and having this like, 333 objects, you got different Schelling points. Schelling points is just like, everyone notices that there's only one red object in a sea of blue, and so everyone goes to the red object. There
Mhm.
were all these different Schelling points. So for example, like people all wanted to inscribe like the 420 dates, the 69 dates. They wanted 9/11 and every year, these sort of like
Bitcoiners are so predictable, right? DJ.
right, exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. But it's like I thought that was kind of beautiful because it's like capturing present day culture, right? Like that's like the culture of the moment, which is something that I think is important to capture as
Mhm.
well, right? We're not just trying to capture history or predict things out. It's like we wanna know what was happening in this moment. So it's very, like, culturally relevant to the moment. But then people also did inscribe eclipses and, astrological moments, full moons, um, but then they also inscribed, like, their children's birthday or the date that they got married, and so it ended up being this really interesting kind of like, you just see what emerges from collective consciousness as well as, like, contributions from individual consciousness, where people have this desire to memorialize themselves as an individual, but they also have this desire to, like, participate in something that they feel is collectively true amongst other people as well. And I just, like I loved seeing that emerge because it wasn't always obvious to me how different like, I would realize, "Oh my god, they're all doing this. They're all doing that," They're all gonna try to get this and this, and it was just interesting to see how that emerged. But,
Mm.
if I think about, like yeah, I am glad that some of those, like, astrological moments or astronomical moments, were inscribed because I do think that's a helpful way to dummy check if you're trying to, like, re-put together this data in the future. So yeah, and then you might just be like, "Well, why is April 20th of every year? Like, why is that so significant to them?" And then to you, you wouldn't even know it's 420, right? Like, it's just gonna be and, like, maybe new myths will be made about how this culture was, like, worshiping this specific time in early spring, where they had all this, like, they'd have this description of what we were doing at that time that would be, like, close to reality, but not.
Yeah,
Um
I think it's safe to assume that archaeologists at any time are going to assume that everything they find is because of ritual, so,
Yes, exactly.
oh, definitely ritual, no.
Mhm.
Uh, no, but it's a really interesting way of, uh, yeah, presenting it. I hadn't thought of it in that way. It's something else I need to now speak about with the students, about the project, because it's basically saying, like, purposely recording popular culture, to write popular history in the future. And as a historian, that is usually what we are able to reconstruct of everyday life. Popular history is by
Mhm.
accident. No one sits down and really records that. And we really lose a lot of history. Like, have you ever heard of the birthday letters,
No.
of the Roman anyways, I no, of course you haven't. No one has heard of it. I'm a
It sounds
Roman
interesting. Tell me about it.
historian, like, yeah, maybe I'm an Aquarian, but think that everyone knows this, but, no. So anyways, we there's a lot of uh, as a human being living in the world knows, there's a lot of, uh biases in the writing of history and presentation of the past. One of it is that, the biggest the most common author of all of antiquity in the Middle Ages is somebody, of course, called Anonymous, and that Anonymous is always assumed to be a man, and more we're finding out that that was not really the case.
Hmm.
One of the very interesting things also is that it was this assumption that women didn't were not very literate in the Roman world in the 1st century, in Britain, way out. In Rome, yes, but way out on the edges of the empire,
Mhm.
women didn't, right? They didn't know how. And we found in England, at one of the big walls there, Hadrian's Wall, that the wives of the soldiers were passing invitations to a surprise birthday party for one of the soldiers back and forth. And it was, yeah, written by one of the wives and sent around and circulated, and then the invitation sent back, like the RSVPs basically.
Mm.
And so yeah, so that's how only by that accident of finding that in archaeological digs did we learn that women are writing, women are literates, and the wives are with the husbands there. So yeah, and so this, like, ephemera, starting from the beginning to say, let's record the everyday. That's really, really helpful as a historian. And really nice.
See, that's what my goal is. I want someone in the
Yes.
future to look back and be like, "Thank God someone did this."
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, all right. Oh, that cold is catching up to me. All right. Okay. I had one more kind of complex question, and then all right, two questions. One about the truth and value, and then one final one. So the truth and value, we talked about it a little bit before, about, I don't know. Well, I'll get to the point. That all reality is based on virtual reality, to go back to quantum physics, because we see in the electromagnetic field that electrons communicate by sharing virtual photons. And these are not real, they're virtual, they're not measurable. And so, since the communication between electrons is the foundation of atoms and therefore of chemistry and therefore of life and everything, that means that all life, everything, begins in the virtual realm. So all these people who say, well, Bitcoin doesn't have any value because it's not real, it's in the virtual, literally, like, that's like life, the value of life, everything begins in the virtual realm. So I'm curious for you then, like, where do you think value comes from in terms of the what we've been talking about, in the Bitcoin worlds, and how does it relate maybe to truth, like we were talking about?
Hmm. Yeah, I think value is subjective. I mean, I guess with the quantum worldview, everything is subjective. But I think value especially is subjective.
Mm.
There's certain things that we value because they're beautiful, which is extremely subjective. There's things that we value because they are necessary for our survival, which is maybe less subjective. But of course, people have different preferences. And then as their survival needs are met, they become much more related to subjective value. Um, and so I think Bitcoin is like this attempt to communicate that subjectivity, meaning I'll pay this much for this thing because I value it this much, as quickly, efficiently, and globally as possible. So, that's one of the reasons why Bitcoin is superior to gold is, if we wanted to have this store of value that is kind of scarce and concrete, which Bitcoin and gold both share this, the problem with gold is it's not easy to transfer around. It's not easy for you to get a small amount of it. And so it's a kind of inefficient way to communicate value as it changes over time, which it is changing over time. And especially as our needs as a civilization are changing over time, it's just, things are shifting. So I think Bitcoin is essentially the most, like, efficient and accurate way to assess the subjective change in value of things over time.
Good.
Whether that's the value of the US dollar, which, like, so far, I think a lot of people don't know how invaluable that is as a currency. I think that's one thing that Bitcoin will get very good at assessing the value of and will be kind of a crazy, reality check for a lot of people. But even just common goods and, the value of risk, the value of uncertainty, all these sort of things that play out in the market, I just think Bitcoin is like the most efficient, sort of first principles way of trying to assess value, where it's not tied to something else. It's not, it's not related to like some other thing that you value, and this is just a proxy for it. It is like the purest way to communicate value.
Yeah, I in the piece that I wrote on the Bitcoin Gazette, I talked about how it's, Bitcoin is value in the sense that it's a full deployment of the scientific method. So
Mm,
effectively, I think similar to what you're saying, it's sort of either it is a deployment of or representation of sort of totality of how value is created in some way. But yeah, on the dollars, I think the majority of my students and a lot of them from who come from the School of Finance, as you know, we have these big gen ed classes and they come from all over.
mhm.
They don't they're shocked when they realize that the dollar is not backed by gold. And then they're like, "Oh, but what is it backed by?" And then you see like a few students in class like, "Oh, no." Like, they like really think it's backed by something and it's
I
world
know.
changing for them to realize that it's just backed by nothing. So, but yeah. All right, final question for today. Okay, most important question of all. Does somebody's birth block affect their personality, their energy, and their quantum entanglements?
Hmm. I think you would have to I like the idea. I think you would have to consult a crypto there needs to be, like, spiritual cryptographers, right?
Oh,
That's, like, I think the first
word.
kind of level of assessment you would need. And then probably some level of numerology as well, right? Where it's like, you have these blocks that have a certain block number. They also come in cycles. So, like, ordinal theory has this like uncommon sats, rare sats, epic
Mhm.
sats, legendary sats. That rareness tier is based off of uh Bitcoin blocks that are mined relevant to natural cycles of Bitcoin. So, like, the difficulty adjustment happens approximately every 2 weeks, but it's a certain number of blocks that it
Mm,
happens. The halving, which happens approximately every 4 years, happens within a certain number of blocks. There's these kind of cycles that emerge from Bitcoin, and
uh,
and it's a natural thing to think, "Okay, well, maybe that first block of the halving is special," you know? And so, I think there's some interesting work to do with I mean, I think maybe the astrological aspect would be the cycles analysis. So, like, this happens, at an opposition between the difficulty adjustment. So, like, at the 1 week mark, that would be, like, the middle of the curve to the next difficulty adjustment. That would be an astrological assessment.
it
You need
just
a cryptography, spirituality person, and then I think the numerology person could put it together. So, that's
well,
what I think it would take to make this, like, new, spiritual system. I think you could do it with those
this
3
sounds
people.
like a great startup pitch,
Yeah, yeah,
to someone. Let's do it.
exactly.
But, yeah, I know. I always want to write an article, like a regular historical article in which I start to use the Bitcoin as the calendar. So basically just going negative time, like, BC and CE, but
Mhm.
BS, like before Satoshi, era BS, and then, yeah, SE or
Right.
whatever. So, and then just going back and once we have this, though, once this startup is running, then we can go back and reevaluate all of the people, historical figures of the past and then
Exactly,
really
exactly.
understand why we are where we are, so, awesome. Well, Aaron, I really, really appreciate you taking the time,
Yeah, thank
and,
you so much for
uh
having me. This was a great conversation.
yeah, I'm excited to follow up on various things, and to see
Totally.
where it goes, but, you said the best way to find you, is just realizing Aaron everywhere except
Yep.
Instagram.
Yeah, Realizing Aaron, X, TikTok, YouTube, those are my most active platforms. You can also Aaron Redwing is my name, you can look me up. I'm around, I'm doxxed, I'm not trying to hide. I'm a public person on the internet.
And you have a conference next week, or?
No, we're just doing a party for Art Basel, and then we'll do our next conference in Vegas in April 2026. So there's the big North American Bitcoin conference. I think it's
Mhm.
April 26th-ish,
Mhm.
something like that, 2026. We're gonna be doing a conference right around there that's more related to ordinals and inscriptions and all that kinda stuff. So, yeah,
Great.
that'll be our next event is April 2026.
I can't wait. A reason to go to Vegas.
Yeah.
Alright, Aaron, thanks very much. I guess, yeah, I'll just, it's over, so, I need to write to Erin and, let her know that she can stop recording, but,
Cool, sounds
yeah. No,
good.
I really appreciate it, seriously, and, those 2 extra days helped me almost get all the way through,
Yeah,
without a
yeah.
coffee. So, yeah. Yeah, so excited. No, seriously though about this project, and the only thing that bums me out about it though is that my somebody owns my birthday
Really?
and they're selling it for 1 Bitcoin. So
That's really funny. Wait,
yes,
what's your sign? What's your birthday?
June 20th.
Okay, so you're a cusp. Interesting. Which
Mhm.
which I wonder why they own June 20th, if there was some maybe, like, the year that they have is, like, some
It's
astrological thing.
I don't know. It's 2009, so I just figured it was 'cause of
Oh, yeah,
uh,
so it was yeah, but still, that's kind of random for them to
it
get
is. I don't know,
yeah.
someone is really into it. Maybe it's Nicole Kidman because she has my birthday.
Yeah,
Uh
there you go.
But yeah, I mean, it's like I grew up as Gemini, so I don't know, like now it's shifted around.
No,
You know,
no, no, you're still Gemini. It's, I have a whole thing to say about that actually, but yeah, you're Gemini, you're good.
I'm like, "Still Gemini? Because I
Yes,
remember
you're
the
still
dates
Gem
shifted around.
No, it's I mean, it depends on so, basically the way that, astrology works in terms of the
Mm,
sign assignment is the constellations are actually pretty irrelevant. Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiacal new year, is the spring equinox, and
mm,
then Aries is 30 degrees of the sky from there. So, like,
mm,
wherever the spring equinox is, it's, like, 30 degrees from there, and then
mm,
Taurus is the next 30 degrees, Gemini is the next 30 degrees, da, da, da. But the constellations relative to that measurement have shifted. So, like,
mm,
Gemini, the constellation,
mm,
no longer, like, overlaps perfectly with Gemini, the sign, like, they've shifted over time. I don't really care about where the constellations are because I don't think that's actually what's important. I think it's just the
mm,
30-degree section of the sky. But
mm,
this is always like a gotcha. It's like, Ophiuchus has come in right at the end. So now there's a 13th sign, like whatever. So if you look back historically, um, like the astrological constellations were just like this was the most clear constellation that was in that pie slice at that time. But the significance is based on the Earth's equinox. Like so it's the significance is always within the solar system. The
mm,
stars are just like a helpful backdrop map. So I think
mm,
that's something that's like hard for people to understand with astrology is like everything is within the solar system. Like the planets are the important part, the Earth is the important part, the sun is the important part. All of the stars are like almost irrelevant to astrology. But some people do care about fixed stars, so I shouldn't say that
mm.
actually. But
Yeah, think come there, you might find really interesting in Israel, where I was professor there and studied there, lived there for a number of years, that in northern Israel, there's these synagogues from late antiquity, 5th, 6th century, that they actually have zodiacs at the center of the synagogue, and what they
mhm,
actually they actually bring in Jewish thinking with the zodiacs, and then some Greek ideas from the Byzantine Empire, like,
cool.
in the center of a synagogue, and then there's also a synagogue like that, in Tunisia, and
Nice.
with no Hebrew, just the Greek, and it's definitely a synagogue, and so it's
Mhm.
very interesting to see how the religions were adapting and then, uh, yeah,
Yeah, I
history
mean,
in a way.
astrology is, like, not antagonistic to any of the major religions. Like, it's only really modern Christians that seem to think that astrology is, like, satanic or something. It's like the Catholic Church was totally fine with Galileo being an astrologer, which he was, that was his main job. It was only when he started to say, like, "Oh, I found all these things that are a little bit controversial in Christianity," like, that's when they cared. They did not care that he was an astrologer. That was totally fine.
Yep.
Like, it's always been okay because astrology is consistent with the geocentric model, and so, like, Christianity was very, like, okay with that because it wasn't challenging the geocentric model in the way that the scientific, like, enlightenment was challenging the kind of, like, Earth as the center
Mhm.
model. So, yeah, it's all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, the church only has a problem when it becomes political.
Yeah.
It's like trying to get the students to understand that the church didn't see, a fetus as a human being until the 16th, 17th century, and they're like, "What?
Mm,
Catholicism was always no, think
no.
again."
Yeah,
So,
that's really interesting.
yeah, and it came up for the same reason. There were some political issues, in Italy that forced a rethinking of the idea, so
Yeah. That's also why I think, when I've talked to Christians about 'cause, I'm a spiritual person, whenever I'm thinking about these spiritual questions, I've never found Christianity to be very satisfying in its answers. I think there's a lot of interesting things about Christianity, especially from, like, a historical perspective, like, when you're talking about things like, "Oh, this was said in the New Testament, and it sort of
Yep.
rewrote this thing," and that's super interesting to me because it tells us about people or, like, maybe it does also get at some universal truth, like, there's obviously some universal truth and wisdom, but I feel like Christianity has been so co-formed with civilization during the age of Pisces that, like, now that we're in this new age, to me, it feels like the only future for Christianity is, like, sort of more like cults that come off of it that are basically unrecognizable from Christianity that was dominant in the age of Pisces. And so, like, when you say things like, "Oh, like, the students are getting more religious and stuff," like, that doesn't surprise me, but I think they're gonna get more, like, cult-like, where they're gonna be sedevacantist, you know what I mean? Like, they're gonna be something else that's kind of like an offshoot of Christianity that takes certain aspects of Christianity, but kind of reinvents them in this way that, like, doesn't is completely unrecognizable from, like, the church.
Huh. Yeah, I mean, I see that already, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One of the things I always try to do, well, I did in an article, is that to try to mathematize the Bible, so, uh,
Mm,
and it's a gigantic project, so but, if we can mathematize something, we can find that it's, I think, a universal truth, and so there's this one bit in the New Testament where it says that Jesus would never defy, the Christian movement because the one cannot deny itself.
hmm,
Uh, so then I use category theory, set theory to then mathematize that and see how that's actually true. And it's weird, like, I think all the time why I teach this religion and quantum physics is I think that Catholic theology and Jewish theologies are reaching the same endpoint as quantum physics, and they're not intending to maybe, but they're both finding the same thing, and I think ultimately they will collapse because they will. That's why transhumanism really interests me. I
huh,
think that they will ultimately unite because they're on the same goal, and a lot of times when we see ideas in quantum physics, I see them in the theology from 1,500 years ago or 1,800 years. Oh my god, how did they know that? How did they think that?
yeah,
And it's like something was already in the mind, and did they get it from other generations or some cyclical nature, or I don't know, but
right, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting stuff. I gotta run because I
Yeah,
have to upload a video by
alright.
2 PM.
Oh my god.
Oh,
Alright, I'll see you later, Aaron.
yeah, this was
Good
great.
day.
Thank you
Have a
so much
nice
for having me.
holiday.
Have a good holiday.
Thanks, you too, bye.